The moment Tessa Whitmore yanked open the cabin door, rifle in hand and heart pounding like a war drum, she did not expect to find a man with snow in his beard and 100-watt smiles shivering on her porch. "I swear I'm not here to rob you," the stranger said, both hands raised and voice hoarse from the cold. My SUV's in a ditch, and this was the only light I saw for miles." Tessa blinked at the man, snowflakes swirling between them as the wind howled behind his broad shoulders. He was tall, maybe 6'3", and layered in a sleek black wool coat that probably cost more than everything in her kitchen combined. But his face was flushed from the cold, lips trembling, and there was a genuine desperation in his eyes. She lowered the rifle slowly. "You're lost?" "Snowed in," he said. "And unless you've got cell signal out here, which I'm guessing you don't, I'm stuck." "No signal," she confirmed, stepping aside. "Get in before you freeze to death." The man stepped into the warmth like it was a miracle. Snow melted instantly on the hardwood floor beneath his boots. "I'm Tessa," she said, locking the door behind him and setting the rifle back on its hook. "You're lucky you didn't run into a bear instead of me." He chuckled, rubbing his hands together. Elias Ford. The name meant nothing to her. "Hang your coat by the fire," she said, already heading to the kitchen. "You look like you haven't eaten in hours." "I haven't." "Thank you, really?" Tessa waved it off, pulling 2 bowls from the cupboard. "You want soup or chili?" "Chili sounds like heaven right now." As she reheated the pot on her old gas stove, Elias wandered around the small cabin, taking in the wood-paneled walls and the photos on the mantel. One showed her and her younger brother fishing. Another, more recent, featured her holding a golden retriever puppy beside a sign that read, "Welcome to Cedar Ridge." "This your dog?" he asked. Tessa glanced over. "Yeah. Gus. He's staying with my friend in the valley while I finish restoring the back porch." Too many nails sticking out. Elias nodded, then took a seat at the rustic kitchen table. "This place is incredible. Cozy. Real." Tessa raised a brow. "You sound surprised." "I guess I'm not used to." "Real." He didn't elaborate, and she didn't ask. They ate in silence for a few minutes, Elias inhaling the chili like a man starved, and Tessa watching him, curious. "Where were you headed?" she asked finally. "Vale," he said. "Was supposed to meet some colleagues. Got turned around when the snow started. My GPS rerouted me through a logging road. Total disaster." "Yeah, you're about 20 miles off anything paved." His eyes widened. "Seriously?" "Dead serious. You're lucky you didn't drive off a cliff." Elias let out a low whistle. "Guess I owe you more than just dinner." She smiled faintly. "Just don't die of frostbite in my guest room. That's all I ask." The storm raged through the night. By morning, the world outside was buried in a thick, glistening blanket of snow. The roads were gone. Trees were coated in white. And Elias Ford was officially stranded. Tessa handed him a mug of coffee and a thick flannel shirt. "Dryer's slow. Hope this fits." He pulled it on, the sleeves a little short. "It's perfect." She studied him again. He didn't talk like a man used to backroads or wood stoves. Even the way he held his coffee like it was something he wasn't used to doing for himself made her wonder. "So what do you do, Elias?" she asked, leaning against the counter. He hesitated. "Consulting." "What kind?" "Tech investments." "Makes sense," she said. "You've got the expensive jacket lost in the woods thing down." He laughed, and the sound was surprisingly warm. "Guilty." They spent the day shoveling snow from the porch and chopping firewood. At first, Elias fumbled with the axe, but he caught on quick. By the afternoon, they were talking like old friends about everything from music to their worst dates. Tessa hadn't laughed this much in months. When they sat on the porch that evening, drinking hot cocoa and staring out at the glowing forest, Elias turned to her. "What made you come out here?" he asked. She took a breath. "Left a job I hated." Bought this place with my inheritance after my dad passed. I wanted quiet. Peace. Something real. He nodded. It's beautiful. You made it beautiful. You say that like you've never built anything yourself. I've built companies, he said quietly. But nothing that feels like home. She looked at him for a long moment. Maybe you've been building the wrong things. Their eyes locked. And for the first time, the air between them felt charged. She stood abruptly. You should get some rest. Day 2 of the storm brought more snow and something else. Tension. Not bad tension. The kind that made her skin hum when their hands brushed. The kind that lingered in his eyes when he looked at her too long. They cooked breakfast together. He chopped vegetables while she flipped pancakes. At one point, he touched her waist to move past her, and she froze. He didn't move away. Sorry, he said, voice low. Didn't mean to. It's okay, she said, her heart hammering. Later that night, they played cards by the fire. He was losing on purpose. She could tell. And when he finally set his cards down and looked at her, really looked at her, her breath caught. Tessa, he murmured, I haven't felt this in a long time. She swallowed. Neither have I. But she stood before it could go further. I'm gonna turn in, she said, not meeting his eyes. Long day tomorrow. Right, he said, his voice tight. She paused at the hallway. Good night, Elias. Good night, Tessa. The next morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. She threw on a coat and boots and stepped out to find Elias reinforcing the back porch with new boards from the shed. What are you doing? She called. He turned, wiping sweat from his brow. You said it was dangerous, right? Figured I'd help. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She stared at him, this man she barely knew, who'd shown up at her door like something out of a movie and was now fixing her house like he belonged in it. And for the first time in years, she let herself wonder what it would be like to let someone in. Really in. She took a step forward. You're full of surprises, Elias Ford. He smiled, eyes warm. You have no idea. By the third day, the storm had stopped, but the snow hadn't budged. The trees drooped under its weight, and the single-lane logging road that led out of the mountains was buried beneath at least 3 feet of powder. The world outside looked like a postcard, one that trapped you inside whether you wanted it or not. Tessa stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing out a mug when she saw Elias outside, brushing thick snow off the roof with a long-handled broom and alarming precision. He moved like someone used to solving problems efficiently, but not like someone who'd done manual labor. There was a difference. And he was learning fast. She opened the door and leaned against the frame. That's not coming down without a fight. Elias glanced over his shoulder, breath curling in the air. I don't lose fights. That a tech thing? It's an Elias thing. She shook her head, amused in spite of herself. Come inside before you break your neck. I've got breakfast. He stepped inside a minute later, cheeks flushed and hair damp with melted snow. He peeled off his coat and boots in the mudroom, then joined her at the small table, where she'd set out toasted sourdough, eggs, and a jar of homemade blackberry jam. You make this? He asked, spooning some onto his toast. Every August. It's a whole thing. My friend Cassie and I pick berries at the edge of the ridge, then curse our way through the canning process. He took a bite, eyes widening. This is criminally good. That's the blackberries doing the work. No, he said, pointing at the toast with a grin. This is pure talent. Don't downplay it. She rolled her eyes but couldn't help the warmth that bloomed in her chest. What about you? You cook? Scrambled eggs and microwave oatmeal. That count? Barely. He hesitated, then set his fork down. I didn't tell you the whole truth. About what I do. Tessa's hand paused over her coffee mug. No? I'm not just in tech investments. I own a firm. Several, actually. One of them developed a platform that sold to a major corporation last year. She studied him. That sounds serious. It was a little over 600 million. She blinked, hand dropping from the mug. You mean dollars? He nodded. So, you're one of those people who can buy a country if they're bored? Only a very small one. She laughed before she could stop herself, then shook her head. You're serious. I am. Tessa leaned back in her chair. You let me think you were some stranded consultant. I was stranded. And I didn't lie. I just didn't lead with the part that makes people treat me differently. She stared at him. There was no arrogance in his tone, no defensiveness. Just honesty. And maybe a little vulnerability. I'm not interested in your money, Elias. I figured. That's why I told you. She nodded slowly. Still. That's a hell of a detail to leave out. I wanted to be a person first. Not a balance sheet. Tessa stood, grabbing her plate and his. You still have to do dishes. Deal. They cleaned up together in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes when two people stop pretending. When she passed him a dish towel, their fingers brushed, and he didn't look away this time. Tessa. She met his gaze. I wasn't expecting you, he said quietly. But now I can't stop thinking about what happens when the snow melts. She folded the towel slowly. Let's not borrow trouble. We've got enough snow for a week. He nodded, but something in his eyes didn't let go. Later that afternoon, she found him on the back porch, staring out at the ridge where the sun had finally broken through the clouds. He turned when he heard her, but didn't speak right away. I've spent the last 5 years in penthouses and boardrooms, he said after a moment. Worried about percentages and market shifts. But out here. He trailed off, like the words weren't enough. You found air? She offered. He smiled faintly. Something like that. She stepped up beside him. Don't get too used to it. Rural plumbing isn't glamorous. I've seen worse. They stood there for a long while, the cold forgotten, the silence between them not empty but full. That night she brought out an old chess set her father had carved in college. The pieces were worn, but still beautiful in their own way. Elias lit the fire while she set up the board. You play? She asked as he settled across from her. Enough to know I'm going to lose. Confidence. I like that. He moved his knight. I'd rather be outmatched by someone interesting than beat someone boring. She raised an eyebrow. Is that a line? No. That's a confession. The game stretched over an hour, filled with strategic pauses and quiet laughs. When she called checkmate, he leaned back and studied her with something unreadable in his expression. You're not what I expected, he said. Neither are you. He didn't reach for her. Didn't lean in. But the air between them thickened, like the pause before a storm. Or something better. You ever think about leaving all this? He asked. I did once, she said. But the longer I stayed, the more I realized I wasn't running from something, I was running to this. He looked at her for a long time. I envy that. She didn't say anything. Because she understood. In the early hours of the next morning, Elias knocked softly on her door. She opened it in a sweatshirt and leggings, hair tousled from sleep. What is it? I heard something. Outside. She frowned, stepping past him into the hallway. What kind of something? Sounded like metal. Or something scraping. She grabbed a flashlight and her boots, and he followed her out to the porch. The snow had shifted. A branch had cracked under its own weight, leaving a mess by the shed door. No threat, she said, sighing. Just nature being dramatic. But when she turned to go back inside, he caught her wrist gently. Tessa. Her name, spoken like a vow. She hesitated. I'm not good at waiting, he said. But I'll wait for you. As long as it takes. She didn't answer. She just touched her fingers to his and let them linger. The next day brought sun. For the first time in days, the cabin warmed without the fire. Icicles melted from the roof, dripping steadily. The snow began to settle. They spent the day clearing a path to the buried SUV. Tessa shoveled while Elias dug out the tires. They worked in sync, not talking much, but understanding each other without needing to. By late afternoon, he sat beside her on the porch again, both of them covered in sweat and snow, and laughing at nothing in particular. He turned to her. I have a jet. In Denver. Once I get back to it, I go wherever I want. She nodded. I want to come back here. Tessa didn't look at him. You sure that's not the Millionaire talking? I'm sure it's you. She went silent. He didn't push. That night, while she was brushing her teeth, she found a note tucked beside the mirror. His handwriting. Neat. Direct. If I leave without kissing you, I'll regret it more than I've regretted anything in my life. She stared at the words until her reflection blurred. When she stepped out into the hallway, he was waiting. Either of them spoke. She walked to him. He didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. The kiss was slow. Certain. Like something that had been waiting long enough. And when they finally pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. Now I really don't want to leave, he whispered. Then don't, she whispered back. But they both knew the snow wouldn't last forever. The snow began to recede, day by day, like a tide pulling back from the shore. Tessa noticed the first patch of gravel in the driveway by mid-morning, then the dark ribbon of the road reappearing in thin streaks through the white. The air felt different too, lighter, the way it always did when winter loosened its grip. But even as the landscape began to shift, something in her resisted the idea of change. Elias hadn't brought up leaving again. He didn't need to. Every hour spent together felt like a clock ticking down. Tessa sat on the steps of the back porch, watching the icicles drip into the slush below. Elias leaned against the railing behind her, arms crossed loosely, his gaze fixed on the slope beyond the trees. You ever think about what makes people stay somewhere? She asked, not turning. He waited a beat before answering. I used to think it was comfort. Familiarity. But now I think it's something else. She glanced back at him. Like what? Peace, he said. The kind you don't notice until it's gone. She nodded slowly. It's hard to find. He lowered himself beside her, their knees brushing. That's why I'm scared to leave. Tessa pulled her sleeves over her hands, voice quiet. I'm scared you will. Elias didn't speak for a while. The only sound was the slow drip of melting snow and the distant creak of a tree shifting in the thaw. I've spent years chasing the next deal, the next city, the next win, he said finally. None of it felt permanent. I could always sell, change, start over. But being here, this doesn't feel replaceable. She didn't answer. She didn't know how. Later that day, she found him in the shed, elbow deep in a tangled mess of wires and old parts. Her father had left behind more than a few half-finished projects, and Elias had taken a fascination with one in particular, the generator that had never quite worked after the blizzard 2 years ago. You're going to electrocute yourself, she said from the doorway. He glanced over his shoulder. Possibly. But if I do, at least I'll go out with some dignity, holding a wrench. You're not seriously trying to fix it. I am, he said, brushing off his hands. Your emergency power situation is one cord away from a fire hazard. She stepped inside, folding her arms. And you know that because? I helped design backup energy systems for off-grid clients in Alaska. One of my companies builds eco-resilient housing. I've seen worse setups than this, believe it or not. She blinked. You build houses? Not with my hands. But I fund people who do. Innovative architecture, sustainable materials. I like things that last. She leaned against the wall, watching him work. That generator's been dead since my dad tried to rewire it. I've had 2 electricians tell me to scrap it. Then they weren't good at their jobs. She didn't realize how long she'd stood there until he looked up again, wiping his hands on an old rag. Want to test it? You're serious? He flipped a switch on the side, then stepped back. The thing sputtered, coughed, then roared to life with a low, steady hum. Tessa's jaw dropped. How? He grinned. I paid attention. That night, after dinner and the crackling of the fire had coaxed them both into a quiet lull, Elias pulled out a folder from his duffel bag. I brought this with me, he said. It wasn't supposed to matter here, but now. I want you to see it. She took it hesitantly, flipping through the pages. Architectural renderings, floor plans, and property reports filled the folder, each one more elaborate than the last. What is this? A project I was supposed to greenlight next quarter. A luxury development in Vermont. Secluded, high-end, winter lodges. But looking at it now, it feels hollow. I haven't been able to shake that since I got here. She looked up. You think this place changed your mind? I know it did. Tessa set the folder aside. So what are you going to do? He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I'm thinking of scrapping the development. Using the funds to start something smaller. More intentional. A retreat that teaches people how to reconnect with themselves. Off-grid living, sustainable practices, real quiet. Something that feels like this. She studied him. You've only been here a few days. I've been alive a long time, he said. None of it has felt as honest as this week. Tessa reached for her tea, hands trembling slightly. You're talking about changing your whole life. I don't want to go back to the person I was before. She didn't know what to say. Part of her wanted to believe every word. Another part whispered that this was temporary, that people like Elias didn't stay in cabins or fall for women who wore boots with holes in them. The next morning, she woke to find him gone. Panic rose in her throat as she rushed to the window. But then she saw him standing beside his SUV, now finally free of the snow. He was talking on his phone, pacing in tight, deliberate circles. She stepped outside without putting on her coat. You're leaving? He turned, startled. No. I'm not. Then what's going on? He walked toward her slowly, ending the call and slipping the phone into his pocket. I had to call my assistant, he said. Cancel a flight. Push a few meetings. And tell her I'm staying longer. Tessa exhaled. How much longer? As long as you'll let me. She stood very still. I'm not asking for forever, he said. Not yet. But I want to be a part of your life, Tessa. Not just for a few snowed-in days. I want to know where you get your lumber. I want to help you fix the porch stairs. I want to meet Gus. Her laugh cracked through the tension in her chest. He's a terrible judge of character. Then I've got a shot. She stepped down into the snow, stopping just in front of him. You're serious? I've never been more. Her hand reached up, brushing against his cheek. Then you'd better start learning how to split kindling properly. Because if you're staying, I'm not doing that chore alone. He caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. Deal. By the end of the week, they'd shoveled out the front drive, restocked the pantry with supplies delivered by snowmobile from a nearby town, and rearranged the living room furniture after Elias declared the couch placement was actively offensive to the flow of the room. One night, while she was brushing her hair by the window, he came up behind her, resting his hands gently on her shoulders. I've been thinking, he said, voice low. Dangerous. Probably. But I want to ask you something. She turned to face him. I want to invest in the cabin. She blinked. What? Not buy it. Not change it. I want to help you expand. Build 2 more just like it. Bring people here. Teach them what you've shown me. You could run workshops, host retreats. I'd handle the logistics, the permits, all of it. You'd be in charge. She stared at him, stunned. You want to turn this into a business? I want to turn this into something that gives other people what it gave me. She hesitated. Why me? Because you see things people miss. And because I trust you. She looked away, overwhelmed. I'm not asking for an answer tonight, he said. Just think about it. She nodded slowly. I will. He kissed her forehead, then left her at the window. Tessa stood there long after he was gone, watching the stars blink into life above the trees. She didn't know what tomorrow would hold. But for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to find out. The following week unfolded like something stitched from a life Tessa never knew. She wanted a rhythm both ordinary and extraordinary. The snow gave way to slush, the trees began to shed their icy coats, and the air softened just enough that she could open the windows without freezing her fingers. Elias stayed. He didn't make a ceremony of it. He simply didn't pack. His duffel remained under the stairs untouched. Instead, he helped her carry firewood, rewired the old porch light that flickered every time the wind blew, and read her sections of a book he found on the shelf she hadn't touched in years. He asked questions about her childhood, her favorite season, the way she took her coffee, and listened like the answers mattered more than anything else in the world. One morning, after a quiet breakfast, she slid her boots on and reached for her jacket. I've got to drive down to the ranger station. Want to come? I thought the road was still iced over. There's a south-facing slope near the base that melts faster. I checked it yesterday. He pulled on his coat. Then I'm coming. They drove in her pickup, an old but loyal vehicle Elias had dubbed the tank, through winding paths carved from the snowpack. The road was muddy in places, slick in others, but she knew every turn by heart. When they reached the station, she went inside to pick up the package she'd been expecting for over a month. Elias waited in the truck, tapping absently on his phone. When she returned, he looked up. Everything all right? Yeah. Just supplies. Some replacement parts for the water heater, and a few things I ordered before the storm hit. They stopped at the general store on the way back, where she introduced him to Mrs. Langley, a stern woman with a sharp eye and an unspoken ability to detect lies faster than most could blink. Tessa handed her a list, and while Mrs. Langley rang up the items, Elias wandered down the aisle, stopping by a display of handmade preserves. You carry these year-round? He asked. Mrs. Langley eyed him. Only when they're worth it. He picked up a jar of peach ginger jam, examining the label. This one's from Tessa Whitmore? Tessa opened her mouth to answer, but Mrs. Langley beat her to it. Her sister. Lives down by the lake? Elias nodded slowly, then turned to Tessa. You never mentioned her. Tessa's shoulders tensed. We don't talk much. He didn't press. He just nodded again and paid for the jam without another word. Back at the cabin, she unpacked the supplies in silence while Elias chopped onions for dinner. When she finally set the last box down, he spoke without turning. What happened with your sister? She took the rest of the inheritance, Tessa said, voice low. After Dad died, we were supposed to split everything. I used my half to buy this place. She used hers to buy out my share of the family cottage. Then she sold it. Didn't even tell me until after the papers were signed. Elias set the knife down gently. I'm sorry. It's not your fault. No. But I hate that someone hurt you like that. She leaned against the counter. I don't need protecting. I know. But I still want to. She didn't respond, and he didn't push. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, but thoughtful. That night, as the wind moved gently through the trees and the fire cast golden shadows across the living room, Elias brought a small case from the guest room. I have something for you, he said. She raised an eyebrow. Should I be worried? Only if you hate surprises. He opened the case to reveal a sleek, portable drone. Not the toy store kind, this one was high-end, compact, with a camera attached. I had this sent to the ranger station before the storm, he said. Figured I'd gift it to the right person. She stared at it. That's not exactly a scented candle. I thought you might want to document the land. Maybe even use it for the retreats. Show people what this place looks like from above. Tessa touched the drone gently. This isn't cheap. Neither is your time. Or your trust. He met her gaze. I wanted to give you something that meant something. She swallowed hard. I've never used one before. I'll teach you. They took it outside the next morning, standing on the ridge behind the shed. Elias showed her how to operate it, guiding her fingers over the controls. When the drone lifted into the air, spinning silently into the clouds, she let out a quiet laugh. I can see everything, she said, watching the screen as the cabin shrank below them. Even the stream that cuts behind the ridge. It's all yours, he said, watching her more than the screen. Every inch of it. For the first time since the blizzard, she felt something shift inside her. A loosening. A lightness. The next few days were filled with planning. Elias brought out a tablet and pulled up drafts for the retreat cabins, collaborating with her on everything from layout to aesthetics. He wanted her involved in every step, not just as a partner, but as the heart of it. This won't work without you, he said one evening, spreading blueprints across the table. She tilted her head. You could do it without me. I could, he said. But I'd be building something empty again. I don't want that. They finalized the proposal together, one she would co-sign and co-own. And when she hesitated at the idea of being legally tied to something so big, he placed his hand over hers. You're not losing anything, he said. You're building something. For yourself? She nodded. Okay. A week later, they drove down the mountain together. The roads were clear now, the trees dripping with meltwater. At the base of the ridge, a black SUV waited for Elias, sent by his assistant to bring him to a meeting he couldn't reschedule. I'll be back in 3 days, he said, turning to her. 4 at most. Tessa looked at the vehicle, then back at him. You sure you'll want to come back? I already do. He leaned in and kissed her, not rushed, not desperate. Just sure. And then he stepped into the car, the doors shutting with a soft finality. The drive back to the cabin felt longer without him. She didn't realize how much space he'd taken up until it was gone. His jacket still hung on the hook by the door. His mug still sat in the sink. She didn't move any of it. The next morning, she flew the drone again, capturing the first blush of spring creeping into the valley. From above, the world looked wide open. Waiting. On the 3rd day, she received a call from the land office. The permits had been approved. The retreat could move forward. She stood on the porch, phone still in hand, heart racing. And then the sound of tires on gravel cut through the stillness. Elias stepped out of a different SUV this time, dressed in dark jeans and a button-down shirt rolled at the sleeves. He looked like he belonged there. She didn't wait for him to reach the porch. You're early. I miss you. She crossed the yard, stopping only when they stood toe to toe. I signed the papers this morning, she said. The retreat's officially in motion. Elias smiled. Then let's build it. That night, they stood on the porch with mugs of tea in hand, watching the last of the snow melt from the ridge. I used to think I'd never settle anywhere, he said. That staying still meant giving up. And now? Now I know that staying can mean choosing something. Someone. She looked up at him. And you're choosing me? Every time, he said. Over every city, every deal, every dollar. I'd give all of it up if it meant standing here with you. She leaned into him, her head resting on his chest. You don't have to give anything up, she whispered. You just have to stay. His answer was a kiss, slow and certain, just like the first. Somewhere in the distance, a hawk called across the valley. The snow melted into the stream. The ridge woke up for spring. And 2 people, who hadn't been looking for anything, found everything. The spring sun filtered through the pine trees in long golden shafts, casting a gentle warmth that hadn't been felt in months. The mountains looked softer now, the snowpack retreating to the higher elevations while the earth below bloomed in cautious greens. Tessa stood barefoot on the porch, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands as she watched Elias haul the last of the lumber from the truck bed. The retreat cabins were no longer just a dream scratched out on blueprints, they were becoming real, plank by plank. You're going to throw your back out if you keep showing off, she called. Elias didn't pause. I'm not showing off. I'm proving I can carry my weight around here. You proved that already the day you rewired the generator, she said, walking down the steps toward him. This is just stubbornness now. He dropped the last beam onto the sawhorses and turned toward her, sweat darkening the collar of his shirt. Maybe I just like seeing you watch me work. She nudged him with her shoulder. You're incorrigible. Only when I'm in love. It hit her every time he said it. Not with nerves, not with doubt, but with the quiet certainty of someone who had once built high rises and now chose instead to build a life from cedar planks and laughter. The way he looked at her still caught her off guard, like she was the only thing in the world that made sense. They had already broken ground on the first of the 2 additional cabins, both designed to blend into the landscape rather than disturb it. Tessa had been meticulous about the details, sourcing local timber, choosing reclaimed materials, and making sure every inch of the space honored the land rather than imposed on it. Elias had stepped back when she needed him to, and stepped in when things got too heavy physically or emotionally. That afternoon, they met with the contractor overseeing the solar installation. Tessa asked the technical questions while Elias negotiated the delivery schedule, his tone firm but respectful. She had never seen someone used to commanding boardrooms so comfortable in work boots and a flannel shirt, crouching in the dirt to double-check the slope of a panel. After the meeting, they hiked up the ridge behind the property, past the stream that had thawed into a quicksilver ribbon. Tessa stopped to catch her breath near a cluster of blooming wildflowers and glanced back at him. You're limping again. He waved her off. Old injury. Skiing accident. I pushed too hard, ignored the pain, and made it worse. You should have said something. He shrugged. I didn't want to slow you down. She waited until he caught up, then took his hand. This isn't a race. You're allowed to rest. He looked at her for a long moment. You make it easy to stop pretending. They sat together at the top of the ridge, her head on his shoulder, the valley below stretching out like a promise. Tessa traced small circles on the back of his hand and finally spoke the question that had been resting on the edge of her thoughts for days. Are you ever going back? He didn't ask her what she meant. Only to wrap things up. Sell off the pieces that don't matter. Hand off the ones that do. You're sure? You built all that. I built it for the wrong reasons, he said. To prove something. Now I want to build something that lasts. Something that matters. She turned to study him. How do you know this isn't just a phase? Because I've never stayed anywhere this long without checking my watch. She laughed, then grew serious. I keep waiting for the catch. There isn't one, he said. Unless you want to count the fact that I can't cook anything more complex than toast. She leaned in and kissed him, slow and certain. You're lucky I have a pantry full of jam to make up for that. The next few weeks moved in a blur of sawdust and sunlight. Gus finally returned from the valley, bounding into the yard and launching himself at Elias, who managed to stay upright for a full 3 seconds before toppling into the grass. The dog followed him everywhere after that, tail wagging like a metronome of approval. Cassie stopped by one morning unannounced. Her arrival was as sharp as it had been the last time they'd spoken. She walked through the front door like she still had a key, and Tessa met her with crossed arms and a guarded expression. I heard you're building some kind of resort, Cassie said, glancing around the cabin with a calculating eye. It's not a resort. It's a retreat center, Tessa said. Sustainable, quiet, and completely mine. Cassie snorted. You always were good at pretending you didn't care about money. Elias stepped into the room without a word, gaze steady. Cassie's eyes flicked to him and narrowed. So this is the guy, she said. Tessa stood taller. This is Elias. My partner. In business or something else? Both. Cassie didn't say goodbye when she left. She never looked back. And for the first time, Tessa didn't feel the ache of her absence. She felt the weight of closure. That evening, Elias found her in the greenhouse repotting herbs for the kitchens in the new cabins. He set a brown paper parcel beside her on the workbench. What's this? she asked. He unfolded a small, hand-drawn map across the table. It was the valley, detailed and precise, with tiny markers for each of the cabins, the greenhouse, the stream, the fire circle, and the trail loop he had cleared last week. I had it drawn up by a friend who does cartography, he said. Thought maybe we could include it in the welcome materials. She ran her fingers over the ink, astonished by the care in every line. It's beautiful. So are you. She looked up, startled. He stepped closer, pulling something from his pocket. A small velvet box. Her breath caught. I didn't plan on asking you this here, in the middle of dirt and time and compost, he said. But it feels right. Because this is you. Real and rooted and strong. He opened the box. The ring was simple, elegant. A single sapphire set in a band of white gold. I want to build a life with you. Not just cabins or businesses or blueprints. A real life. One with dogs and jam seasons and arguments about porch furniture. Will you marry me, Tessa? She didn't cry. She laughed bright and startled and full. And then she nodded, slipping the ring onto her finger. You're going to regret agreeing to argue about porch furniture, she said. I already regret not asking you sooner. He pulled her into an embrace, and she buried her face in his neck, breathing in the scent of sawdust and cedar, and the man who had turned a snowstorm into a beginning. The wedding was held 2 months later, on the ridge where they had kissed for the first time. They stood beneath a canopy of pine branches, surrounded by wildflowers and the people who mattered only a few, but enough. Gus wore a bow tie. Tessa wore boots beneath her dress. Elias wore the look of a man who had finally arrived somewhere he never wanted to leave. When the vows were done and the rings exchanged, he kissed her like he meant it. Like he always would. The retreat opened that fall. The first guests came from across the country, arriving weary and skeptical, unsure of what they'd find in a place with no cell signal and too many stars. But they left changed, carrying something home they hadn't arrived with. Elias handled the logistics. Tessa led the workshops. Together, they taught people how to be still, how to listen, how to find themselves again. And every night, they walked back to the cabin hand in hand, the dog trotting ahead, the porch light glowing like a promise. Years passed. The cabins multiplied, but never too many. The trees grew taller. The valley held them. And through it all, their love held steady, not perfect, but true. Built not on grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but on the quiet, everyday choice to stay. Because sometimes, the most extraordinary love stories begin with a snowstorm, and end with two people choosing the same place, the same life, again and again. Forever.